figure out what it is, but I have to fix it.
Okay.
Walker. I have to speak to how do you come about leaving a setup wrong?
Hmm.
Okay, so that's good. Ah, I see. Almost there.
All right.
So prepare yourself.
All right.
Oh, okay, we are live. Let's look at this. Congrats. Did I hit yes? I think I did. Oh yes, you're live. Okay. Very good. Apologize to them for starting slow. Blame it on me.
Okay. Well, it is all right in dedication to the one who makes this possible. He may say this and he may say that, but all that is being said now is because of what he allows to have happen. And so it is happening. So good evening to you, O friends of truth. And here we are again. It is dusk. It is dusk on the west coast of an evening in spring. And what we have this evening is, as a theme, the poetry of the sublime. And so, to start off preliminarily, we must needs put forth a few notions of the sublime, and they are offered as suggestions. And whether or not they are suggestions or points of departure or crystallizations or misdirections, the responsibility for it lies upon the one who says it. And so I stand before you in full responsibility of all that may not be true here. And if anything is true, I give the credit to all that makes it possible, because it is about the sublime. And so, as we approach our idea of the sublime, we have to set aside some of our notions of what knowledge is. For I would say to you, knowledge, as a consequence of something learned, is very much a part of how we proceed as mortal human beings. But the kind of knowledge that the poetry of the sublime is drawing from is the kind of knowledge that makes it possible for a thing to be. And so I would say to you that the sublime comes to us as a concept. The elements and the pieces and the shadows and the echoes come to us from many groups of languages and from many cultures, but more to the point than that, from many different individual consciousnesses. For that is who I am, and that is who all of us are, each in our own individual way. And we would say that sublime, well, starting off, it's two trees with branching concepts, two conceptual trees. Sublime, sub, in this sense, means up from underneath. We can start to think of it as up from underneath. We can start to think of it then as a movement of up from underneath. But we also have to remember, as we go into that motion, into that conceptual motion, let us take a hint from our forebearer Heraclitus, who said that the way up is the way down. So when we come up from underneath, we are going up. But we could also just as well be going down, because we're living in a world of concepts where images and meanings twist around a certain kind of axis. Up from underneath, sub. But what about the lime, sublime? What about the lime part? This is where lime, we're talking about something like liminal or limnal or like a space between. Let us consider the word threshold as a helpful word for us. So, up from underneath, at the same time as at the threshold. At the threshold, liminal space between the in and the out, and also between the up and the down, subliminal and sublime. But let's also consider this term is applied oftentimes. I mean, this is how we've come to become familiar with it, the sublime. It comes to us as something meaning great, something meaning beyond, something meaning surpassing, majestic, powerful, overcoming, something even so defiant of the terms that we might bring to it as human beings struggling to understand what it is that faces us when we face the sublime. A great many inspiring thinkers have examined, and dare I say it, tackled this notion of the sublime and what it might mean. I note in passing another forebearer of ours, Schopenhauer, who had a specific kind of take on his notion of the sublime, where he would speak of it as the sublime is something that can seem even not only just remote, but hostile to human habitation. I remember well reading Schopenhauer and coming across his pages where he describes the sublime as having as an essential element of its meaning, or an essential example of it, the beauty of a remote mountain peak, the rocks and the cold and the snow and the wind and the inaccessible heights of it. And for Schopenhauer, then, his notion of the sublime meant it was a notion of beauty that did not care for you as a human being of will who would want to go there and be there and draw close to it, as we always do. We see something that is beautiful and it moves us in a certain way, and we desire to grow, to get closer to it. But for Schopenhauer, if it was sublime, that might be an indication that there was something about it that was forbidding. So there was that for Schopenhauer in the sublime that was forbidding, that put you as a human being in your place and left the sublime to be in its place, remote and inaccessible. We don't have to take it to the extreme, to the liminal extent that Schopenhauer took it, but we could keep that in mind at times when we want to, contemplate beauty. For beauty and the sublime and all that which is beyond is also offered to us for our contemplation. And in contemplation, is it not so that we want to draw closer toward that which beckons us? And in that sense, familiarity is an important piece. So there is the forbidding, and then there is the familiar. And both of them have a part to play in our notion of the sublime. But let's also consider in the forms of culture, social culture that is, social organization. In ancient times, in the early days of aristocratic forms of rule, the councils were often held in the East and in the West in the doorway, in the threshold of the vastness of the castle. The business of the court would be held in the threshold, neither in nor out, so that those without could perceive and those within could carry on the business of rulership and the affairs of the land and the realm and the domain. And so there is that element then of something that's neither here nor there also. All ways to describe something that defies, rational analysis, rational explanation, or even rational comprehension. So this is a little bit of the sublime. But we've got to remember, when we're talking about poetry, that we are, to some degree, in the realm of words and in the realm of the thoughts that words can describe, in the realm of language, and so the sublime is going to have manifestations of itself in other words, So, for your contemplation, I offer to you a word which is one of the 100 words that describe the qualities of the deity, the qualities of God, from the poetic lore of the Middle East. We have this word Jalil. And Jalil can mean great. Jalil can mean surpassing. Jalil can mean beyond. Jalil can also mean border, something bordered, and what is put upon that border. Jalil. And it is one of the words that describe the attributes of a divine being known to us by the qualities that it manifests in our created world. And so, drawing from that, we can take a step farther, and a step maybe perhaps closer into the more familiar, out of this abstract, into something more familiar and concrete, into the realm of the metaphorical, into the realm of stories, of vignettes. The poet Rumi, Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi, in his imaginative, spiritual, emotional, intellectual life, encountered the sublime in the form of a human being. In the form of a human being who went by the name of Shams of Tabriz. Now, this encounter between Rumi and Shams of Tabriz gives us a certain kind of story, by which I mean a certain way to understand the motion and the movement and the action of the sublime in the life of an individual. When Rumi encountered Shams of Tabriz, he, as he put it, encountered a treasure in a ruin. And thereafter he only spoke of it metaphorically. He encountered an individual who lived neither here nor there, who presented to the world an eccentric appearance, dressed in strips of red and black of a patchwork cloak, arms bedecked with bracelets and jewels, necklaces of dubious value. One who did not, to quote a cliche, suffer fools gladly, and yet Rumi recognized Shams of Tabriz, and Shams of Tabriz recognized Rumi, and in the encounter between them, in their conversation, in their mystical conversation, their word for it is sobhet. In their mystical conversation, there was born as if a natural outgrowth from a seed planted in the human spirit from the very beginning, as a mystical outgrowth, a vast and ramos and branching poetry of the sublime. A treasure in a ruin was how Shams described himself. A treasure in a ruin. He also described love as the rending of 1,000 veils. The rending of 1,000 veils on its way toward the beyond, as if it was the beyond itself, there manifested before Rumi. I want to look more closely at this notion of a treasure in a ruin. How can this be? A treasure in a ruin. Well, there was a wall. There was a wall, a stone wall, that was falling apart. And there were two travelers. They were traveling from place to place, and they were mendicants. They went from place to place, and what food that they got by begging. And very often, it was gladly given to them. Food for their sustenance. For they were recognized that in this time and in this culture, it was a thing that could be. They were recognized as holy travelers. And so they would be fed with what the people had to spare. And for the people who fed them, it was their way of acknowledging a reality beyond their daily village life with these travelers who came and went from here to there. And for the two travelers, even though it was their mission to go from place to place and to speak to the people of things which the eye could not see, it was also part of the challenge of their life that they had to take what they were given. And if they were given nothing, then they had nothing to take, and they would go hungry that day. And in this particular journey, though, these two travelers, they were treated fairly well as they went from village to village. But they came to a place once where the villagers wanted nothing to do with them. "Beggars, go away," said the villagers in this particular place. "Go away." They threw stones at them. The dogs barked at them. The children threw sticks and dirt clods at them. They were driven away in a manner most rude. One of them was old and experienced, and it didn't bother him too much. The other one, though, was young and still in the midst of coming to terms with his own inner ideal and the way that ideal worked in the world. And this younger one was troubled, and he was upset by the hostility shown to them by these particular villagers. But they hastened away, because when rocks are thrown at you, it's no time to think. You've just got to get away. And so they got away. But as they came to the outskirts of the village, they came to a wall. And the wall was falling apart. It was a ruined wall. It was a stone wall. It was old. And time and the elements had their way with this wall. And as they went by this wall, still on the outskirts of the village, the old one saw the wall and stopped. And he bent down and he lifted many stones. And he brought these stones toward the ruined places in the wall. And he repaired the wall through skillful placement of stones fit together in such a way that the wall would still stand. He did maintenance work upon this wall, which was in need of maintenance. And then they went on their way. They continued until they came to a river. And they looked through the reeds and vegetation upon the banks of the river, and they saw, not too far away, a shack. And coming from a window in the shack there was a light, a candlelight in the window. And the old one said to the younger one, "There is a place where we might find shelter." And the younger one said to the older one, "Well then, let us go there, and perhaps we will find food and rest." And so they went there. They came to the hut of an old woman who graciously invited them in and bid them to sit down, and fed them, placed before them bread and cheese and water, and gave them that night a place to sleep. But before they went to bed, they had some conversation. And the old woman said, I welcome you to holy travelers. I'm glad that you have come to my humble abode. I wish that I had more to offer you, but what I have to offer you, I'm sure, is to the benefit of you and good for your sustenance. And she went on to speak of her life a little bit. She said, oh, my son, he is far away, and I don't know, really, if he is safe or not. I trust he is. I expect to see him sometime, and I hope to. But what has happened is he's been taken away by the soldiers. They have impressed him into their army and taken him away, and we have no choice in the matter, we humble folk. When the soldiers come, they demand what they demand, and we give it to them. And so my son is away. But we, my son and I, we operate the ferry boat. Yes, the ferry across the river. And that boat down there that you see, suspended, with lines to a cable that goes across the river from one side to the other, why, that's the way that my son and I work for our livelihood. And now that my son is gone and with the soldiers, I myself, though I am old and feeble, I still operate that ferry boat, taking travelers across. Tomorrow, if you wish to go, I will take you across also. And I only ask that you offer blessings this evening in your prayers for the safe return of my son. I trust that he will be back, but everything helps from travelers such as yourself. I know that you will bring blessings upon me in so many ways. And so this was their conversation. And so the two travelers, they slept that night in that humble abode. In the morning, they got up. The old woman gave them some goat's milk to take with them, and also some bread, such as she could spare. She gave them her blessing, and yes, she helped them aboard her ferry boat, and they went across the river. And then she took the ferry boat back across the river and left it in its place there on the other side, on the other bank of the river. And then she went back where she lived to do her business back at home. And the two travelers on the other side of the river, they lingered and they paused there a moment. And then the old man did a strange thing. He picked up heavy rocks, just as he had before, to repair the wall. Only this time he lifted heavy rocks and he flung them toward the river in the direction of that boat. And heavy rock after heavy rock he flung at the boat until the boat was damaged. And the boat sank under the water, out of sight, into the depths of the river. And then they continued. Now, the younger traveler, it was all he could do to hold his tongue. He was appalled at what his elder had done. And it was more than he could bear as the day went on. So that evening came, and they rested for the night by the side of the road, camping. And the younger one said to the older one, he said, Oh, wise man, I came to you myself. I was an orphan. I begged for you to take me in, and you could teach me wisdom, and I in turn would serve you. I would cook your meals. I would take care of you. I would maintain your house for you. And then the day came when you took a notion to go on a journey. And so I felt it was my duty to accompany you on your journey. I went with you. And we went from village to village begging for our food, and we ate such as we received from the people. And we came to the village where they were hostile to us and mistreated us and threw rocks and stones and sticks and dirt clods at us. And on the outskirts of that village, these wicked villagers, you repaired their wall. You were not asked, you were not paid. You repaired their wall. It took some labor lifting those heavy stones and placing them in the places they need to be placed. This puzzled me, but I held my tongue. And then we went on our way, and we were treated so well by this poor, humble ferryboat woman who gave us food, shelter, and rest goat's milk and bread to carry us on our way, took us across the river on the ferry. And what did you do? You sank her ferry boat. This is appalling to me. Oh, I might have called you master at one time, but now I fear I must take your leave, unless you can explain to me the reason why you did these things. And the old man said, Abdul, for that was the younger one's name, Abdul, you have asked me, and so I will tell you. I will tell you, first of all, about the villagers who were hostile to us. Yes, they were hostile to us. We passed by a stone wall. The wall was in disrepair. It was falling apart. It was soon to be in ruin. And as the external pieces of the wall were falling down, it was only a matter of time. It was inevitable that, as the wall fell apart, what was inside the wall would be revealed. And what was inside the wall? A treasure. A treasure of gold coins and silver coins and jewels of all kinds. But the villagers, as you and I both know, they were not ready for such a treasure. The way that they treated us was an indication of their spiritual state. And would they have discovered that treasure, they would have misused it in oh so many ways. It would have increased their worldly power, and it would have been misused. They simply were not ready to have such a treasure. So I repaired the wall. I made it so that the wall would not fall down until an interval of time had passed, and such a time would come when the wall would once more break down, because that is the way things are in this earthly world. The wall would break down and the treasure would be revealed. But at that time, the villagers, in that future time, they would be ready and they would not misuse the treasure that would be revealed when that wall finally did come down. And so that's why I repaired that wall. And so Abdul, he heard that, and yes, it opened up his eyes. I mean, he was traveling with this old man in order to see what his eyes could not see. And now he was seeing something that he had not thought of before, and he realized the truth of it. But the more he realized the truth of it, the more it bothered him about this awful thing that the man had done later. And he said this to the old man, "Surely, sir, it still bothers me so that the woman who was so kind to us, you sank her boat under the waves." And the old man said, "Yes, I sank that boat deliberately with rocks that I threw that damaged the boat and made it sink. And this is the reason why. As the woman was explaining to us, the soldiers have been roving about there for some time. The soldiers come and they take what they want to take. They take people for soldiers. They take food. They take livestock. They take blankets and sustenance. They take hay, grain, and they take what they wish because they're soldiers and they're armed, and the people cannot. They can't do anything about it at this time. But the soldiers have been around, as the woman was explaining to us. They have taken her son. Her son, though, is essentially safe. He has been taken by them, but when they're done with the help that he can give them, they will let him go, and he will return home. But there's something else that the soldiers have been doing and will be doing in the next few days. I know this because the soldiers, if they had come and seen that boat, that ferry boat, they would have taken it. They would have taken it for purposes of their own, so that when I sunk it, I made it so that it would sink under the water, in the river, out of their sight, so that when the soldiers came roving through, taking what they could take, they would not even see the boat that would be there for them had they seen it. It would be under the waves, you see. And it's a simple matter, you see. When the son comes back from his captivity, he will go to the place where the boat is, and being an experienced ferry boatman, he will see it there underneath the waves. He will raise the boat. And it will not be that difficult to repair the boat so that they will still have the boat, which would have been taken otherwise. So that is why I did what I did. And so these two travelers, the younger traveler, then he learned a lesson that day, and he realized that the old man was wise and that he did good things, and that there was a lot of ways of doing good things in this world that sometimes were mystifying and surprising and even contradicted conventional notions of what was good or evil. So, well, what the story tells us is things are not as they seem. And what the Sublime tells us, the signs that the Sublime gives us as we approach it at the threshold of what we can possibly know, in its splendor, in the way that it beckons us, in the way that we are compelled by our desire to see something that transcends our earthly knowledge. It's a similar kind of thing. It brings us to our limits. It brings us to the limits of our perception. And even as the things that become familiar to us seem to fall apart, what is revealed is the inner reality, which is veiled to us until such a time as we can see it, until we are ready to see it. So, like so many things, perhaps everything, the Sublime is a sign for us. Well, that's one way to approach it. I also, though, have to mention something else. In this lore, in this vast body of knowledge, there are many personages and many people. We see Shams of Tabriz. We see Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi. We have the works that they wrote in consciousness coming down to us for our consciousness to contemplate. And there are others referred to. There are individuals living in history who come to us in certain manifestations in our own culture, and we become familiar with them. But then there's a whole other side to them that we may not see until we see them in their other cultural manifestations, in other cultures, in other places, in other manifestations. So allow me to mention Isa bin Maryam. Perhaps you've heard of Isa bin Maryam. Actually, I am quite sure you have heard of Isa bin Maryam by another name. Isa bin Maryam. And what such poets as Jalaluddin Rumi said about Isa bin Maryam could fill many a volume. But what Rumi and other poets of the Sublime, in this tradition that I'm speaking of now, what they had to say about Isa bin Maryam was, all of you ruined souls, to all of you ruined souls, come to Isa bin Maryam. Isa bin Maryam is the one who has a message for you, or perhaps the one who has sustenance for you. Isa bin Maryam. Isa bin Maryam. Many, many stories are told of Isa bin Maryam. Well, you know what they said about Isa bin Maryam? If someone died and was dead, Isa bin Maryam knew how to bring him on back to life. And we don't know what kind of language he used, or if they do that kind of thing anymore. Still, it became part of his mystique as he traveled around. He was also a healer. Yes. Once someone, and this is told in all the traditions, someone came to him who was blind and could not see. Isa bin Maryam scooped up from the ground clay of the earth, clay of the road. He spat upon it. He rubbed it around in his hands and he made a soft mud, a poultice, and he placed it upon the eyes of the one who was blind and could not see. And when that poultice fell away, light came into that man's eyes. And he went home, joyful that he could see again. He was met, when he came home, by some legalists. And the legalists came to him. And the legalists said, that one over there, we have it on good authority that he has been violating the laws of the Sabbath, and he has been healing the sick on a day which it should not be done. You who can see now and who could not see before, could it be that it was by his agency that you were able to see by the work that he did on such a day as today, which is the Sabbath, would you like to, and it could be beneficial to you, would you like to testify against him? And the story tells us that that individual who was blind before and could now see, well, he could really see, because he gave to those legalists an apt reply. He did not engage with them in any legalistic arguments about what was done on what day or by what agency or who had done it or when it happened or anything like that. He simply said, I was blind and now I see. And that was that. That was a fit reply for them. It sent them away. You might guess who I'm talking about now by another name, Isa ben Maryam, Jesus, son of Mary. Well, let's take a step farther into this, shall we? Because poetry, especially the poetry of the Sublime, is actually the best medicine for fundamentalist confusion. Because it is the action of art, of poetry, of art in whatever form, of the consciousness of art, that we, in contemplating it, for it is given to us to contemplate. That's the virtue of art, of any kind. It is given to us to contemplate so that we come closer to the actual nature of our true experience. We see things, we learn to see things with our own eyes. We may be blind, and then we see, by virtue of this action of a hand scooping up clay on the road, spitting on it from the mouth, kneading it into a workable form, skillfully applied to the eyes to take away the veils, so that we can see. Clearly, this is metaphorical speech. Yes, you are listening, and I am speaking in a metaphorical way. And this, too, is good medicine for the confusion of fundamentalism. But let's keep it to ourselves. It doesn't need to be a big deal. It just is something that we can think about ourselves. That's the nature of the poetry of the Sublime. Well, anyway, at the same time, though, everything that I'm speaking of is a form of energy, right? Thought is energy. Consciousness is energy. And energy can take all of these different forms and all these different kind of intensities. And it can heal us, and it can get us into trouble. And Isa ben Maryam and a great many other poets of the Sublime had a lot of good things and meaningful things and intelligent things to say about this energy of consciousness. I want to mention quickly an old Gnostic gospel. Like so many of the writings about Jesus, son of Mary, or Isa ben Maryam, not all of the recorded actions made their way into the official documents. And there have been many bodies of officialdom, each with their own set of documents and their own arguments. And these arguments are not to be dismissed in any way. As a matter of fact, it would be a whole other subject to examine some of those theological arguments, because some of these theological arguments for or against canonical inclusion, they're actually very worthwhile to listen to and to trace out, because all of them represent to us the ways that we human beings have offered to us, or have our history, our culture, our consciousness, the consciousness of all who have come before us, give us many, many ways and many, many doors. In the Father's house are many mansions, many ways of understanding the nature of the divine. And so you could say that the history of our consciousness, in regards to the poetics of the Sublime, the history of our consciousness is the ways that we have and continue to understand the nature of ultimate sublimity. And of course, to even speak about something that is sublime, you have to speak about ultimate sublimity, to work out our complexes, to work out our God complexes. Yes, religions and the poetics of the sublime are ways for us to grow in our understanding of God. But you don't have to take it in any way other than a way to work out a certain complex that any of us might have, a complex having to do with ultimacy. You could look at it that way. Or you could be entertained by the beings and by the things that they do. Well, so consciousness is energy. Energy manifests as qualities. When we're speaking of the divine, we speak of the divine qualities because we don't know what the ultimate sublime looks like to our eyes. We have some idea that if we stare at the sun too long, it will be bad for us. But we can look out at nature and see the growth and the form of all the things that the sun nourishes, and the inner mechanisms of the plants and the animals and ourselves, all the things that come to be under the light of the sun. And we can appreciate the nature of the sun in that way by studying the manifestations of that thing. Whereas if we look directly at the sun, we'll simply go blind. So that's something to think about also. And you can apply that to your own vocabulary. Yes, because the poetics of the sublime teaches all of us. And we have to be totally sincere as we try to grow in understanding of it. The poetics of the sublime grants to us what is always true, and that is that all of us have our own road toward the sublime and our own vocabulary and our own words so that we can understand it for ourselves, our own descriptions, and a way we can contemplate and grow close to our own experience as it unfolds in our consciousness, away from the magic mirrors of mass media, more toward the actual primordial mirror of our transparent consciousness, which is bonded enough to the images that are reflected there. But we can learn from that. That's part of what this. That's the implicit teaching of any poetics of the sublime. Well, I hope I haven't. I hope my cup hath not runneth over too far. But speaking of cups that runneth over, speaking of containers, in other words, just a note here about magic words. I did mention that Isa bin Maryam knew the words that could bring the dead to life. Or so it was said, about this word. It is said, according to a couple of sublime poets, two of them that I'm thinking of right now, I'm sure that there are many others, but Attar and Attar's descendant, Rumi, they told an anecdote of Isa bin Maryam, who was once approached by a foolish man. The foolish man saw a pile of bones out in the desert. The foolish man approached Isa bin Maryam and asked him, "Oh, Isa bin Maryam, you, sublime one, who are said to know the word by which the dead are brought back to life. I, too, am a questing human being. I, too, am a student of the divine glories, and I want to do a good deed. That pile of bones over there, I want to restore it to life. Oh, do tell me the magic word by which that pile of bones can be restored to life." Isa bin Maryam looked at him and knew right away. Now, as Rumi and all the others tell us, Isa bin Maryam is a friend of the ruined soul. And to be a fool is to be a ruined soul and not know it. Isa bin Maryam could see by this man's bearing, by the way he breathed, that he had a lot to learn, but he didn't realize that he had a lot to learn. He did not know that he did not know. But how can you tell him? Isa bin Maryam tried. Isa bin Maryam said, "Speak not of that pile of bones over there. That which you see over there, which is ruined and decrepit, is external to you. Speak to me of what is ruined and decrepit within you. Speak to me of your own ruined soul, and I can be of some help that way. In other words, if you were blind, I can help you see. But you have to know you were blind. And sometimes that's difficult for people. But the foolish man would have none of this. He said, I don't even know what you're talking about. And I don't accept it as being important to me. I want to do a good deed. You want me to do a good deed? You want to empower me to help me to do a good deed? Then tell me the word. Do tell. And I don't know if the man, cajoled or begged or pleaded or demanded or stamped his foot or whatever. At some point, it came to Isa ben Maryam that we are free, of course. We are free in what we do and in what we learn. We can be advised as to what is good for us to know and what is not good for us to know. But if we reject this advice, well, God is no respecter of persons. What is true is true. And so Isa ben Maryam said, you want to know? And then I'll tell you. And he told him the magic word. And then Isa ben Maryam went on his way because he had his father's business to go about. Whereas the foolish man, he went over to the pile of bones and he spoke that word. And perhaps you might have seen this coming. The bones rose up in the air. They reassembled themselves before his very eyes. The bones fit back together. 4 legs, skeletal frame, a tail, the flesh, the muscles came back to cover those bones, along with claws, a mane, and sharp teeth. Yeah, he resurrected a lion. He resurrected a hungry lion. And that was the end of that foolish man. As the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas tells us in another verse, what does it say now? I would like to recollect it. Blessed is the lion that is eaten by a human, for in that way the lion is made human. But cursed is the human that is eaten by a lion, for in that way the human becomes lion. In other words, it's this interplay. It's metaphorical speech, of course. What it's talking about in metaphorical, sometimes harsh, but certainly dramatic, folkloric, mythical language, poetic, sublimely poetic language, is the growth of the soul, the growth of the demanding ego, the hungry soul, which exhibits the qualities of the animal, which is on this long road of consciousness, which we are all on and which we've always been on, those before us and those after us, and we ourselves, to learn to become human, you see. So it's that kind of poetics of the sublime that I'm speaking of. Well, it so happens, though, we've looked at it in this particular window, and it is a good window, and perhaps we'll come back to it. There's more there for us. But there's other ways of conceiving of the sublime. Lyrically, it's still the poetics of the sublime. But let's look at a tradition that is nourished by the European consciousness, the tradition of the lyrical soliloquy, exemplified in oh so many. And certainly here, when I speak of the poetics of the sublime, it is a nutritive genre. I mean, it is consumed into all these different consciousnesses and traditions, and it breaks apart so that the energies of its particles are released into the world and into consciousness, you see. And it takes oh so many forms. One thing about Shams of Tabriz, though, before I talk about this other manifestation of the poetics of the sublime. Rumi referred to Shams of Tabriz as the king of no place. I paraphrase, I'm sure. The king of no place, or the ruler of no city. In other words, a king without an earthly location, as if to say, in our inner selves, we are dimensionless beings, but no less real for that, even more absolutely real for that, because even the realm of dimension is the realm of form. And in between form and formlessness, we have the image. And the things that I'm speaking of, given to us by the poetics of the Sublime, are images. And images are intermediary nodes of energy that we can contemplate so that we can learn of the world of manifestation and we can learn of the world of the unmanifest. And in the image is where we come to know ourselves as beings who study this in this contemplative way. Well, anyway, so the Western lyrical tradition that offers us so much in the poetics of the Sublime. I kid you not. I tell you these things here, which may seem unfamiliar and exotic or whatever, but go outside, look at a rainbow, look at your own reflection in a rain puddle, look at the little waves stirred by the winds, and know that in every tradition in the world, breath, wind, and spirit are cognates of each other in terms of vocabulary. And you will see it before your very eyes. And that, too, is a poetics of the Sublime. Let's not forget, the Sublime can be exalted and forbidding, but the Sublime is also humble. The Sublime can be tricky, as you might well guess. But anyway, the Western lyrical tradition, the soliloquy. Let's consider a poet I love so much, Rilke, Reiner Rilke. In this translation, lovingly rendered by Stephen Mitchell, oh so inspired and oh so inspiring, we can consider it now and come to some notion of the Sublime, another doorway, another set of doorways or windows that we can take a look, even enter into the realm of the Sublime, and use it for the contemplation, for the nourishment of our spirits and our souls. Rilke wrote this poem. It didn't make it into the final version. You could say it was an outtake. It is part of the Duino elegies, vast and sublime, free poetic works, but this is kind of an outtake from the Duino elegies. But nevertheless, for some reason, it's a thing that has taken root in the garden of my memory. And he says, or he sings, or he wrote or composed this poem, which goes, "Now shall I praise the cities, those long surviving. I watched them in awe, great constellations of earth. For only in praising is my heart still mine, so violently do I know the world." Well, for some reason self-consciousness comes upon me, so I have to refer to the text. It is not anything for me to be self-conscious about. Now shall I praise the cities, those long surviving. I watched them in awe, great constellations of earth. For only in praising is my heart still mine, so violently do I know the world. And even my lament turns into a paean before my disconsolate heart. Let no one say that I don't love life, the eternal presence. I pulsate in her. She bears me. She gives me the spaciousness of this day, the primeval workday for me to make use of, and over my existence flings in her magnanimity nights that have never been. Her strong hand is above me, and should she hold me under, submerged in fate, I would have to learn how to breathe down there. Even her most lightly entrusted mission would fill me with songs of her, although I suspect that all she wants is for me to be vibrant as she is. Once poets resounded over the battlefield. What voice can outshout the rattle of this metallic age that is struggling on toward its careening future? And indeed, it hardly requires the call. Its own battle din roars into song. So let me stand for a while in front of the transient, not accusing, but once again admiring, marveling. And if perhaps something founders before my eyes and stirs me into lament, it is not a reproach. Why shouldn't more youthful nations rush past the graveyard of cultures long ago rotten? How pitiful it would be if greatness needed the slightest indulgence. Let him whose soul is no longer startled and transformed by palaces, by gardens' boldness, by the rising and falling of ancient fountains, by everything held back in paintings, or by the infinite there-ness of statues. Let such a one go out to his daily life, where greatness is lying in ambush, and someday, at some turn, will leap upon him and force him to fight for his life. This is Rilke. And there's quite a few different ways the sublime is evoked in this poem. I want to mention that one of the themes of the Duino Elegies, and one of the ways it starts out, is an angel appears to Rilke. Now, it is not like an angel comes that he sees with his eyes. No, it's more like a stirring within him. Cognitively, you see. This is the real vision. It's not something necessarily that can be described even in terms of the physical senses. It is an inspiration. It is a stirring within him. And it's just like the realization dawns on him that every angel is terrifying. This is a different kind of angel. These are the messenger kind of angels. These are Islamic angels, you could say, in terms of the flavor of them, the characterological flavor of them. They are the servants of Allah, and they do the work that Allah has them do, and they are filled with the being of Allah, just as any angel is in any tradition, and yet they're not human. So there is that kind of remoteness, that apartness, which is parts sometimes. There's that deep, intimate familiarity of the sublime, and then there's also this kind of remote quality. Anyway, so I'm going to continue with a little bit more of Rilke here from another outtake from the Duino Elegies. And like I say, part of it is just because the mystery of it, it has somehow sort of kind of become part of me, so much so that part of the appeal of it in the way that I hear it or read it, it's just kind of familiar. It's like it's granted to me. For example, in this outtake, or this original version of the 10th Duino Elegy, where Rilke says, "Someday, emerging at last from the violent insight, let me sing out jubilation and praise to assenting angels. Let not even one of the clearly struck hammers of my heart fail to sound because of a slack, a doubtful, or an ill-tempered string. Let my joyfully streaming face make me more radiant. Let my hidden weeping arise and blossom. How dear you will be to me then, you nights of anguish, Why didn't I kneel more deeply to accept you, inconsolable sisters, and surrendering, lose myself in your loosened hair? How we squander our hours of pain. How we gaze beyond them into the bitter duration to see if they have an end, though they are really seasons of us. Ponds, meadows, our winter-enduring foliage, our inborn landscape where birds and reed-dwelling creatures are at home. High overhead, isn't half of the night sky standing above the sorrow in us, the disquieted garden? Imagine that you no longer walked through your grief grown wild, no longer looked at the stars through the jagged leaves of the dark tree of pain, and the enlarging moonlight no longer exalted fate's ruins so high that among them you felt like the last of some ancient race. Nor would smiles exist any longer, the consuming smiles of those you lost over there, once they were past, so purely did they enter your grief. Almost like the girl who just said yes to the lover who begged her so many weeks, and she brings him astonished to the garden gate, and, reluctant, he walks away, giddy with joy. And then, amid this new parting, a step disturbs her, and her glance, in its fullness, sinks totally into a stranger's. Her virgin glance that endlessly comprehends him, the outsider who was meant for her, the wandering other who eternally was meant for her. Echoing, he walks by. That is how always you lost. Never as one who possesses, but like someone dying, who, bending into the moist breeze of an evening in March, loses the springtime, alas, in the throats of the birds. Far too much you belong to grief. If you could forget her, even the least of these figures so infinitely pained, you would call down, shout down, hoping they might still be curious, one of the angels, those beings unmighty in grief, who, as his face darkened, would try again and again to describe the way you kept sobbing long ago for her. Angel, what was it like? And he would imitate you and never understand that it was pain, as after a calling bird one tries to repeat the innocent voice it is filled with. So this too, so many things that it offers us. But I give it to you now as a way to understand the flowing nature of this. There is no way the rational mind can really isolate anything of this, to understand it. And yet at the same time, windows and doors open all the time. And you know what? I'll say this, what we've learned this evening maybe. These angels that we speak of, and we see this again and again in all the traditions, as mighty as they are, as frightening as they are, as filled with their own being as they are, they, the creations of God, look upon us, the creations of God as well. Only we have something that they do not have. We have some element of God that the angels do not have, because our human nature is unique to us. And sometimes the angels allow themselves curiosity, and they gather around and wonder what it is that we're talking about. So much so, the movie Wings of Desire, there's a whole bunch of stories in those kind of movies where sometimes, a bang and a clatter, an angel's wings hit the ground because And sometimes they are granted that. Sometimes they get to be human too. And sometimes they remember what it was like for them, and other times they forget. But at that point, then the angels have an odyssey of their own, and they begin to experience the world as we experience it, with all of our perplexities, if they wish. And I wonder if they would really want to once they do that. But nevertheless, that's just something to think about. And I think that's what that poem leaves us with, an image of an angel trying to do this. But now I see that the time has done something, run ahead of us in such a way that I can only just say, I want to do one more poem from Rumi, if it's okay. And it won't take but a minute. And this is Rumi, and he's speaking of Shams, and eventually Shams and Rumi, in the ways that things play out in this world, they are separated by circumstance. And yet at the same time, there's an infinite communicative wavelength that is established between these two. And it's exemplified in this poem. It is called Meeting Beyond Space. Happy the moment when we are seated at the palace, thou and I, with two forms and with two figures, but with one soul, thou and I. The colors of the grove and the voices of the birds shall bestow immortality at the time when we shall come into the garden, thou and I. The stars of heaven will come down to gaze upon us. We shall show them the moon herself, thou and I. Thou and I, individuals no more, shall be mingled in ecstasy, joyful and secure from foolish babble, thou and I. All the bright-plumed birds of heaven will devour their hearts with envy in the place where we shall laugh in such a fashion, thou and I. This is the greatest wonder, that thou and I, sitting here in the same nook, are at this moment both in Iraq and Khorasan, thou and I. Just like now, each in our own world, joyfully contemplating together the poetics of the sublime. A taste of it here I have offered to you, and may it be to the nourishment of us both, of us all. Okay. This is the part where I thank you for your heroic listening. And we shall continue on this road of study, and we shall learn what we learn, and we will be strengthened to face the perplexities and the riddles of the world, and we shall be succored and healed by the knowledge that comes to us. Knowledge that is not so much learned as the original being of that which we study, of that which we seek, of that which we actually are, thou and I. Alrighty then, so long for now.